It is no secret that the country is in the midst of a housing crisis due to a lack of new homes being built, and Washington state is no different. Seattle, in particular, grew by more than 128,000 people in the 2010s, making it the third fastest growing metropolitan region in the country. City officials project Seattle will grow by another 240,000 people by 2044, hitting a milestone of 1 million people. Unfortunately, while Washington's population has been steadily increasing, the construction of new housing has not been matching the population growth. In a letter from Jay Inslee, he noted from 2000 to 2015, the housing supply in Washington failed to keep pace with growth by 225,000 units. This is partly due to restrictive zoning laws, which prevents the development of various types of missing middle housing. In Seattle, for example, roughly 80% of the residential land is zoned for single-family homes. Other laws, such as minimum lot sizes, setback requirements, and height restrictions, further reduce how many homes can actually be built. By diversifying developments so duplexes and triplexes can exist in residential neighborhoods, removing height restrictions so taller buildings can be constructed, especially near light rail, and allowing more mixed-use developments, cities anywhere can greatly increase the housing supply. In fact, early last year, Urban Institute released a report on Puget Sound's housing deficit that led to this exact conclusion. Our analysis shows that the region is on track to add fewer housing units than it needs to match expected population growth by 2050. The Puget Sound Regional Council estimates a need for about 275,000 new housing units in the region over the course of the next decade. This report assesses 4 possible changes. Allow duplexes and fourplexes on parcels zoned for single-family homes, allow missing middle developments on moderate-density parcels, double allowed density located close to transit stations, and legalize residential uses on commercial and public parcels. Urban Institute projects land use reforms executed at the regional level could conservatively encourage an almost 70% increase in housing production over the next decade and result in a fairer distribution of housing availability across the region. This brings us to Seattle's comprehensive plan, called the One Seattle Plan. This plan is basically a roadmap that sets the precedent for how the city will grow over the next 20 years. Unfortunately, this roadmap kind of sucks. I should specify that this is just a draft, but it's not a good sign when the first draft is an anemic plan that fails to address Seattle's need to substantially increase its own housing supply over the next 2 decades. There is one good thing I must point out. The One Seattle Plan would legalize corner stores in every area of the city. I will be discussing the importance of neighborhood cafes and corner stores in a future video. Now on to the bad part, aka the rest of it. In 1994, Seattle adopted its first comprehensive plan under the State Growth Management Act, and it concentrated nearly all growth to areas called urban centers and urban villages. Between 2010 and 2020, 83% of new homes were built on these sites. This map shows the future planned land use, and it doesn't look like there's much new going on here. The One Seattle Plan made the daring decision to rename some of the jargon used to define these districts, and added a new classification called Neighborhood Center. These neighborhood centers are dotted around town in a seemingly random fashion, which accentuates an issue I like to call the islands of walkability. In the United States, walkable neighborhoods are rare, and if someone is lucky enough to live in one, chances are it's going to be pricey and it's going to feel like it's on an island surrounded by noisy stroads and single-family homes. Seattle is not that much different in this respect. Downtown South Lake Union and Capitol Hill form a big island of walkability, but other neighborhood villages feel like a couple of blocks with dense developments surrounded by suburbia. These neighborhood centers appear to be concentrated on arterials, which is problematic because it forces people who are priced out of single-family homes and people who prefer to live in a walkable neighborhood into areas that have more air and noise pollution, along with the bigger threat of cars being dangerous, hitting people, and crashing into buildings. It would be a lot better to expand the urban villages so multifamily dwellings and apartment buildings can be on blocks with quieter, narrower streets. Unfortunately, that is not the plan. Instead of expanding these urban villages to absorb more housing growth, Seattle plans on adding only 5,000 new homes to Ballard and 4,000 new housing units to the University District using this existing zoning. The plan also fails to densify areas near existing and future transit corridors. There are plans to create a new urban village around a future infill station, but not one near Judkins Park Station. When looking at a map of projected transit, a lot of streets are going to have bus routes running with 10 minutes frequencies, along with several corridors with future rapid ride expansions. There doesn't seem to be much of a correlation between these future transit expansions and increases in housing density. With all these changes, Seattle is expected to add a measly 100,000 homes over the course of the next 20 years. To reiterate, over the course of the last 10 years, Seattle's population grew by 128,000 people, and over the course of the next 20, it will grow by approximately 240,000. Either the plan is to squeeze 2.4 people per home, basically eliminating the idea of a single-person starter home, or have fewer people move here. This 20-year plan is doomed to fall short before it even gets started. This level of growth is pathetic for a variety of reasons. Building 100,000 homes would be a pace of 5,000 homes per year, which is less than half of the pace Seattle was building in the last few years. Seattle easily could have pumped those numbers up. The reforms considered by Urban Institute would have made room for 270,000 additional homes near transit, more than double the growth outlined in the comprehensive plan. I know it may sound like I am complaining that it didn't hit this high of a bar, but the comprehensive plan actually aims to deliver less than the bare minimum. According to estimates by the Metropolitan King County Council, Seattle would need 112,000 new homes by 2044, including 44,000 for people making less than 30% of area median income. Housing affordability is directly correlated with the number of new homes being built. It would be a lot easier to meet this requirement if Seattle was building far more homes than the bare minimum. It sure does make you wonder how many people are being turned away now because Seattle is too unaffordable for them, and how many people will continue being turned away from this city because it aims to build an abysmal number of new homes. Not only does it fail to meet the projected housing requirement, it also doesn't meet the state's recommendation for density. In 2023, the Washington State Legislature adopted House Bill 1110, which required cities to allow missing middle housing throughout residential areas, such as duplexes, courtyard housing, and townhouses. The scale of these developments is regulated with the floor area ratio, which basically sets the limit on the size of the units per lot. Unfortunately, the One Seattle plan aims for lower densities than the recommendation. As explained by the SeattleTimes, if building 4 homes, Washington's Department of Commerce says cities should ideally permit each to be 1,500 square feet on a 5,000 square foot lot in order to maintain the floor area ratio of 1.2. Seattle's plan, on the other hand, would limit homes to just over 1,100 square feet when there are 4 on a lot in order to maintain a maximum of 0.9. Consequently, developers are more limited on what they could build on lots in areas zoned for single-family homes than they would be if the city followed the state's guidelines. Between this and concentrating most development to neighborhood centers and urban villages, it is apparent that the city is outright ignoring the missing middle housing bill. Not building enough housing is not just a Seattle problem either. It's a problem for neighboring cities as well. If Seattle doesn't build enough housing, it forces others to pick up the slack to ensure there is ample housing for the entire region. If Seattle fails to meet its minimum requirement, where are those homes supposed to be built? The housing need doesn't disappear, it trickles to other cities. Suddenly, Bellevue, Redmond, and Tacoma need to build more housing than originally projected because Seattle isn't pulling its own weight. If Seattle doesn't build enough housing, people who have jobs in Seattle would be forced to live further away where it's more affordable. This means they have less access to transit, which adds to traffic and congestion and ultimately undermines the city's own climate-related goals. Downtown is expected to add 60,000 new jobs, which is more than the number of homes being added to every regional center combined. So where are the people moving to Seattle for work expected to live? To add insult to injury, even Bellevue has a more ambitious growth plan than Seattle does at this point. Bellevue is planning on adding 152,000 additional homes over the next 20 years. I don't think it should be too much to expect the biggest city in the Puget Sound region to have the biggest comprehensive plan. It also sets a bad precedent for what we should expect from other long-term projects. A lot of projects in Seattle are funded by the Levy to Move Seattle, but those levy dollars are going to expire at the end of this year. There is legitimate reason to be concerned that the next levy isn't going to be ambitious enough to keep up with this city's growth, but that's a topic for a future video. Seeing the One Seattle plan in this state is especially frustrating because we have waited a long time just to get the comprehensive plan. The draft was originally supposed to be released April of last year. Then it got delayed, and delayed, and delayed, until March 5th. Let's be honest here, it doesn't take a year to create a comprehensive plan that largely doubles down on the urban village model and builds housing at a slower rate than the bare minimum. The reason this plan was continuously delayed was to minimize the amount of time the city would collect feedback so they can jam through a plan that barely addresses the housing crisis. Since this is just a draft, there is still a window of opportunity to fight for a less milquetoast plan during the city's public engagement campaign in March and April. There will be 7 open house sessions at each district and a virtual session on May 2nd. A modest improvement would be expanding the urban centers along rapid transit routes and abiding to the state's guidelines for missing middle housing. Hopefully, with enough advocacy, we can convince city leadership to adopt a plan that better meets Seattle's needs. There may also be an opportunity to force Seattle to do better at the state legislative level. During this year's legislative session, 2 important bills passed the House chamber. One was a bill that would spur more transit-oriented developments, and one was the Housing Accountability Act, which employs what is known in California as the builder's remedy. While these bills did pass the House, they later died in the Senate. During the next legislative session, it is crucial for the House to reintroduce these bills and pressure the Senate to pass the same bill so these changes can be adopted in future comprehensive plans. But for now, the draft comprehensive plan doesn't instill confidence that Seattle is heading in the right direction.